Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Imagine a silent, invisible killer. Something that can shut down your body's energy production in, well, just moments. It leaves your cells gasping for oxygen, even when there's plenty of it all around you. Today we're taking a deep dive into cyanide poisoning. It's a critical toxicological emergency, often rapid, incredibly severe, and the symptoms, they can be profoundly misleading. Our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the complex world of cyanide. We'll look at its tragic past, its surprising present-day sources, and try to understand exactly how it works, and crucially, what it takes to save a life.
Yeah, and we'll be drawing from, comprehensive clinical notes, detailed research, stuff that really lays bare the intricate mechanisms, and of course, the urgent management needed for this potent toxin. It's a fascinating, if pretty sobering exploration we're eager to share.
Okay, let's unpack this. So when you hear cyanide, I bet you instantly think of like spy movies, right? Or maybe old crime novels. But the story of cyanide is incredibly real, chillingly potent, and it actually spans centuries. How far back does its tragic legacy truly go?
You're right. It's not just fiction. Its history is quite old. It was first isolated way back in 1782 by a Swedish chemist, Carl Wilhelm Scheele. And, well, in a really grim twist of fate, he reportedly died from its effects just a few years later.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's an immediate chilling lesson in just how potent the substance is right from the very beginning.
That's quite a start, and it seems its darker history only grew from there. We're talking chemical warfare, genocide. This isn't just history book stuff, is it?
No, far from it. It was used in chemical warfare by Napoleon III and then again in World War I. But perhaps most infamously, hydrocyanic acid pellets, known as Zyklon B. They were responsible for over 1 million deaths in Nazi gas chambers during World War II.
Horrifying.
Truly.
Yeah.
And the horror doesn't stop there. Its reach extends to mass casualties and criminal acts. Think about the 1978 Jim Jones People's Temple mass suicide. 913 people died from potassium cyanide.
I remember hearing about that.
Or the 1982 Chicago Tylenol murders. That tragically led to tamper-resistant packaging regulations for pharmaceuticals. That's a direct impact on our daily lives, stemming from this very toxin. And even now, there are increasing concerns about the dark web making access easier for things like illicit euthanasia.
It's unsettling how its historical impact still echoes today. But I'm curious, beyond these historical atrocities, where else might we encounter it? In our modern world, It's not just a relic of the past, is it?
Not at all. The sources are incredibly varied and often pretty surprising. First, you've got industrial and occupational exposures. Cyanide salts are widely used. Things like metallurgy, like gold mining, photographic developing, plastics manufacturing, fumigation, even jewelry making and metal polishing. So think of someone working in a factory or a workshop. The risk is very real.
Yeah.
Even skin exposure is a danger. If clothing gets wet with cyanide salts, it can actually be absorbed through the skin. And the sheer number of reported exposures, I think it was over 1,200 between 2011 and 2015, that really underscores its continued relevance in these settings.
Wow, so it's not just these highly specialized rare scenarios. It's actually, well, somewhat common in certain industries.
Yeah.
But what about for those of us who don't work in, say, a factory or a jewelry shop? Where else might it lurk?
Well, a major source, and one that's often overlooked, affecting potentially everyone, is smoke inhalation.
Smoke from fires.
Exactly. It's significantly associated with the combustion of common household and building materials. Things like wool, silk, synthetic rubber, polyurethane, the 2013 Kiss nightclub fire in Brazil. Cyanide poisoning was a significant factor in over 200 deaths there.
That's terrifying.
It is. Basically, any organic compound that has both carbon and nitrogen in it can produce hydrogen cyanide gas, HCN, during combustion. It's truly a silent component of many fires.
That's a really chilling thought, especially given how common house fires are. Makes you realize the hidden dangers. What about natural sources? Are there plants or foods we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Many plants contain compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. A common example is the prunus species that includes things like apricots, bitter almonds, cherries, peaches. They contain amygdalin.
Amygdalin?
Yeah, and when you ingest it, your body can convert it into cyanide. You might have also heard of laetrile, that controversial cancer treatment.
Vaguely, yeah.
It contains amygdalin, and despite, lacking any real scientific evidence for its claims, it can definitely cause cyanide poisoning if ingested. And then there's cassava. It's a vital food source in many tropical regions.
Cassava, right, like tapioca comes from it.
Exactly. It contains linamarin, another cyanogenic glycoside. And if it's not processed properly, it can be really dangerous.
Oh.
But soaking the peeled cassava in water for about 5 days can reduce the cyanogen content by like 90%. So proper preparation is key.
It's incredible how a necessary food staple can be so dangerous if not handled correctly. And you mentioned even medical treatments. Sometimes they can cause this.
Yes, that's what we call iatrogenic poisoning, meaning it's caused by medical treatment itself. Specifically, prolonged or high-dose nitroprusside therapy. It's used for severe hypertension.
Okay.
Each nitroprusside molecule slowly releases 5 cyanide molecules in the body. And if a patient's sulfate stores are low, maybe they're malnourished, or post-operative cyanide can build up even at therapeutic rates. It's a subtle but serious risk.
So it's not just the dramatic mass incidents. You mentioned the dark web. People are finding ways to intentionally create this at home now.
Precisely. Beyond those large-scale historical events, there are now websites out there providing detailed instructions on how to produce hydrogen cyanide at home from various available chemicals. It's definitely a concerning development for public safety.
So we've covered this huge range of sources: history, industry, fires, food, even medicine and intentional acts. What does this all mean for us, and maybe more importantly, for medical professionals? Why is understanding these diverse sources so absolutely crucial?
Well, what's truly fascinating and frankly troubling is that cyanide poisoning is often considered rare by many physicians. And that, unfortunately, leads to misdiagnosis. There was a significant study looking at poison control data. It found that 74% of patients with intentional overdoses didn't receive an antidote.
74%.
Yeah, likely due to a failure to even recognize the poisoning in the first place. So familiarity with these diverse sources, it literally saves lives. It raises that clinical suspicion, prompts doctors to consider cyanide as a possibility in a much broader range of scenarios, not just the obvious ones.
That statistic is really impactful. It just drives home how easy it is to miss. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. What exactly is cyanide, chemically speaking? And how does it wreak havoc so incredibly quickly once it's in the body?
Okay, so chemically, cyanide manifests in several critical forms. First, you have the inorganic cyanide salts like sodium cyanide, NaCN, and potassium cyanide, KCN. These are usually crystalline white solids, and they're pretty water-soluble. Then there's hydrogen cyanide gas, HCN. It's colorless, very potent, and crucially, at body pH, it's mostly undissociated, meaning it doesn't carry a charge.
Okay, and why is that important?
Well, its low molecular weight and that non-ionized nature allow it to rapidly cross biological membranes, like the ones in your lungs. Think of it like a tiny key just sliding right through a lock, no resistance. That explains the devastatingly quick effects when it's inhaled.
And then there are the organic forms, right? The ones with the delayed effect. You mentioned those earlier.
Exactly. That's a critical distinction. Those are the organic compounds, or nitriles, things like acetonitrile and acrylonitrile. Here's the key. They are not toxic on their own. They only become toxic when your body metabolizes them, breaking them down to release the cyanide ion.
I see. So the body kind of has to process them first.
Precisely. And this is vital for understanding why their effects can be significantly delayed, sometimes for hours or even, days. We should also briefly mention cyanogen gas and cyanogen chloride. That last one is actually listed as a chemical weapon agent.
Well, okay, here's where it gets really interesting and scary. The potency. Even a tiny bit can be lethal. When we say tiny bit, how little are we truly talking about? Like a grain of salt, a pinch.
It's astonishingly potent. For an adult, the oral lethal dose of potassium cyanide, KCN, is roughly 200 milligrams.
200 milligrams. What does that look like?
Well, think about a standard paperclip that weighs about a gram, so 1,000 milligrams.
Yeah.
200 milligrams is about 1/5 of that. It's not much at all. For airborne hydrogen cyanide, concentrations of just 270 parts per million are immediately fatal.
Immediately.
Yeah. And to put that in perspective, the OSHA permissible exposure limit, for an 8-hour workday is only 10 parts per million.
Wow, the difference is huge.
It really is. And a lethal oral dose of HCN itself in solution is estimated at maybe 50 milligrams, even smaller.
That's truly chilling to grasp the sheer lethality.
Hmm.
So once it gets into your body, how exactly does it get in?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? Where does it go?
Right. Acute toxicity can happen through several routes. Inhalation of HCN gas is extremely efficient. It's like breathing poison directly into your bloodstream leads to rapid collapse. Dermal absorption through the skin can occur, especially with prolonged contact or if the skin is broken, like with burns or cuts. And for ingestion, most cyanide salts are rapidly absorbed right from the mucous membranes in your mouth and digestive tract. Although if they're in capsules, the onset of symptoms might be delayed a bit, maybe several minutes, as the capsule needs to dissolve first.
Okay, so once it's absorbed, wherever it came from, where does this lethal substance go in the body? Does it target specific organs?
Once absorbed, virtually all cyanide in the body exists as HCN at physiological pH, and it distributes widely. It doesn't really discriminate. It goes to vital organs like the liver, spleen, kidneys, brain, heart, the places that use a lot of oxygen. It also gets concentrated within your red blood cells, binding to something called methemoglobin if it's present.
Thankfully, our bodies have some natural defenses,
That's right.
Ways to detoxify it. But I imagine even those have limits, especially with such a potent poison.
They do have defenses, but those limits are reached very quickly in an acute poisoning scenario. The major pathway for detoxification involves an enzyme called rhodinase. It's found throughout the body, but mostly in the liver. Rhodinase converts cyanide into thiocyanate, which is much less toxic and can be excreted in urine. But rhodinase needs sulfur donors to do its job, things like thiosulfate.
Okay, so it needs fuel, basically.
Exactly. And crucially, in acute poisoning, the body's own endogenous sulfur stores get used up very, very rapidly. That's the limiting factor in cyanide detoxification. The enzyme is there, but it runs out of fuel. This is precisely why sodium thiosulfate is such a key antidote. It provides that essential sulfur fuel to keep the rhodinase enzyme working faster.
Got it. That makes sense.
There are minor pathways too, and a metabolite called ACTA is a useful biomarker because it's stable and can confirm exposure later. It's also worth noting that giving sodium thiosulfate can dramatically decrease cyanide's elimination half-life. It can go from potentially, 60 plus hours down to about 10 minutes, just speeds everything up.
So you've really laid out how it gets in, moves around, and how the body tries to fight back. But what does it actually do once it's inside our cells? This is the core of its devastating effect, isn't it?
This is absolutely the core. This is where the profound cellular impact occurs. Cyanide inhibits, over 40 different enzymes, but its most significant action, the one that causes the most damage, is its incredibly high affinity binding to cytochrome oxidase.
Cytochrome oxidase.
Yeah.
That's in the mitochondria, right? The cell's powerhouses.
Exactly. It's a crucial component, specifically the cytochrome A3 portion, right at the end of the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Think of the mitochondria as the engines of your cells, and cytochrome oxidase is like the final spark plug needed to burn the fuel oxygen to create energy, ATP. Cyanide binds tightly to a key part of that spark plug, the copper-iron center, and basically jams the entire engine.
It just stops it cold.
Shocks it cold. The consequence is your cells can't use oxygen to make ATP, their energy currency. So imagine having plenty of oxygen delivered by your blood, but your cells are suffocating because they literally cannot use it. That's cellular hypoxia. The fuel's there, but the engine is seized.
So even though the blood might be carrying plenty of oxygen, it's like the body's cells are drowning in it because they can't actually use it. That's really counterintuitive. And what happens then when your cells can't make that energy?
Precisely. The oxygen is available, but the machinery to turn it into energy is completely shut down. This disruption of aerobic energy production forces the cells to switch to an emergency backup plan. Anaerobic metabolism. It's much less efficient. This rapidly increases the lactate concentration in the body and leads to a severe anion gap metabolic acidosis.
Okay, the acidosis, lactic acid buildup, right?
Well, here's a crucial aha moment about that acidosis. It's not primarily caused by the lactic acid accumulation itself, although that contributes. It's more because the normal process of making ATP synthesis, actually consumes protons. It consumes acid. When ATP synthesis stops because cytochrome oxidase is blocked, that normal proton-eating function is gone. Meanwhile, your cells keep hydrolyzing ATP, breaking it down, which generates protons. So protons are being generated but not consumed. They build up, leading to acidemia. The normal acid-clearing machinery is off. That's a critical detail.
Okay, let me make sure I get this. It's not just that the backup plan makes acid, it's that the main plan normally gets rid of acid. When that main plan breaks, the acid just builds up uncontrollably.
You've got it exactly. The normal energy-making process clears acid. When that's broken, acid accumulates. And yes, it does have other toxic effects beyond just hitting cytochrome oxidase. It can inhibit another enzyme, glutamate decarboxylase, which might contribute to seizures. It also messes with something called NMDA receptors on brain cells. It enhances their activity.
What does that do?
It increases the flow of calcium into neurons. Too much calcium influx triggers the generation of reactive oxygen species, ROS. Think of ROS like damaging free radicals, causing rust inside the cells. These ROS damage cell membranes further damage the mitochondria and trigger cell death, both programmed apoptosis and uncontrolled necrosis. It even makes the body's own detoxification enzymes like rhodonase less effective. It's a vicious cycle.
Given everything we've just talked about, the cellular chaos, the speed, it sounds like diagnosing this in an ER must be incredibly challenging. You said the symptoms are varied, nonspecific. It really is like finding a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
You've absolutely hit on the core challenge for clinicians. There is no single reliable symptom, no specific syndrome that just screams cyanide poisoning. The initial effects are often generalized, easily mistaken for a heart attack, stroke, sepsis, other overdoses. Many severe conditions look similar at first.
So how quickly do symptoms even start? Is it always instant, or can there be that delay you mentioned?
It really depends on the exposure route and the specific form of cyanide. High concentrations of HCN gas or maybe an IV injection, symptoms can appear in seconds. Literally, collapse can happen that fast.
Seconds. Wow.
For ingested inorganic cyanide salts, symptoms typically appear within minutes. But here's that really surprising, tricky part. The nitriles, like acetonitrile. Because they need to be metabolized first, symptoms can be significantly delayed hours to days. For acetonitrile, it could be 15 to 20 hours before someone gets really sick. And that also means the toxicity can be prolonged, needing longer treatment.
That delayed onset for nitrile sounds like a huge diagnostic trap. What are the key organ systems that show signs of damage first? What should doctors be looking for?
The clinical signs mainly reflect the rapid dysfunction of the organs most sensitive to oxygen deprivation, the ones needing the most ATP. The central nervous system gets hit hard. Symptoms like headache, anxiety, confusion, lethargy, then progressing to seizures, and finally, coma. It's a potent neurotoxin. The cardiovascular system shows complex responses, often an initial spike in heart rate and blood pressure, followed by a drop in blood pressure with a compensatory fast heart rate. But the terminal event, sadly, is consistently bradycardia, a very slow heart rate, and profound hypotension. In the respiratory system, you might see initially rapid breathing to chypnea, then it slows down, bradypnea, and eventually stops altogether, apnea, and the GI system. Abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, sometimes even bleeding gastritis from corrosive cyanide salts if ingested.
Okay, what about that famous cherry red skin we always hear about in, detective stories? Is that a reliable sign we should look for?
Ah, yes. That's a critical point to clarify because it's such a common misconception, even among medical professionals sometimes. A cherry red skin color can occur. It happens because the cells aren't extracting oxygen from the blood. So the venous blood returning to the heart is still highly oxygenated, still bright red, which can make the skin look flushed or reddish. However, and this is crucial, it's a common error to believe all victims must have it. Many victims, especially those in shock with poor circulation, actually show cyanosis.
Cyanosis, the bluish discoloration?
Exactly, bluish skin due to poor oxygenation or perfusion. So the bottom line is, the absence of bright red skin or blood should never, ever be used to rule out cyanide poisoning. That's an incredibly important clinical takeaway. Don't rely on it.
That's really vital clarification. So if the obvious signs aren't reliable, what about lab tests? Even if they take time, are there any clues in early blood work that might make a doctor suspicious?
Yes, while definitive cyanide levels won't be back quickly enough for emergency decisions, certain standard lab findings are highly suggestive. You'll almost always see a significant increased anion gap metabolic acidosis. That reflects the severe acid-base imbalance. You'll also see an elevated lactate concentration because of that shift to anaerobic metabolism we talked about. And here's another critical clue, pointing directly to the cellular problem. Elevated venous oxygen saturation, maybe above 90%, or a very small difference between arterial and venous oxygen levels.
Meaning the tissues aren't taking up the oxygen.
Precisely. The oxygen is delivered, but it's not being used. It's also crucial to remember cyanide does not impair oxygen transport by hemoglobin itself. It doesn't cause methemoglobinemia directly or affect the oxygen saturation reading on a standard pulse oximeter. It's a cellular poisoning, not a blood transport problem.
Okay, and that bitter almond odor, the other classic clue. Can we trust that?
Absolutely not. Its unreliability cannot be overstated, seriously. First, it's rarely noted in actual clinical practice. Most people, if they smell anything, describe it as pungent, musty, or metallic, not distinctly almonds. Second, about 20% of the population literally cannot detect it at all due to a genetic trait. Third, rapid olfactory fatigue happens. Even if you can smell it, your nose quickly gets used to it and you stop noticing it. Therefore, just like the skin color, its absence should never be used to rule out poisoning. It's another dangerous myth to rely on.
It sounds like, given all these non-specific symptoms, unreliable physical signs, and delayed lab results, diagnosing acute cyanide poisoning is incredibly difficult in the heat of the moment. Before we get to treatment, which is obviously critical, can you quickly touch on what happens long-term if someone survives acute exposure or if they have chronic low-level exposure?
Yes, there can definitely be long-term consequences. Survivors of severe acute poisoning can develop delayed neurologic sequelae. Things like Parkinsonian symptoms, movement disorders, memory problems, sometimes weeks to months later. Imaging often shows damage to specific brain areas like the basal ganglia. For chronic exposure, like from smoking or certain diets, you can see things like tobacco amblyopia, visual loss linked to cyanide and smoke, or konzo, a type of spastic paralysis seen in parts of Africa linked to improperly processed cassava, especially in malnourished populations. Chronic exposure has also been linked to thyroid problems like goiters and hypothyroidism, so the impact isn't always immediate.
Okay, this really sets the stage for the most crucial part. Because diagnosis is so tough and time is absolutely critical, doctors have to act incredibly fast, often working on suspicion alone. What's the guiding principle for medical teams facing a potential cyanide case?
You said it perfectly. The guiding principle is immediate empirical antidotal therapy is paramount. You treat based purely on high clinical suspicion. You cannot wait for lab confirmation. That cyanide level won't be back in time to make a difference in a rapidly deteriorating patient. Every second truly, truly counts.
And while they're getting ready to give an antidote, what's the foundational supportive care, the absolute first steps?
Right. Supportive care happens concurrently, immediately. It's the ABCs, but amplified. Meticulous airway management, maybe intubation and ventilation. Providing 100% oxygen is essential. Even if cells can't use it well, maximizing delivery helps saturate plasma and optimize any residual mitochondrial function. Rapid VOIV access is crucial. Drawing blood for basic labs, blood gas, lactate, and yes, a cyanide level for later confirmation, but you don't wait for it. Managing hypotension aggressively with IV fluids, crystalloids, and vasopressors if needed to keep blood pressure up, and administering sodium bicarbonate to counteract that severe metabolic acidosis, titrating it carefully based on blood gas results.
What about decontamination, if someone got it on their skin or ingested it?
Good question. Specific decontamination steps are critical, and number one is protecting the healthcare providers themselves with appropriate PPE gloves, gowns, eye protection. For inhalation, just removing the patient to fresh air is usually sufficient. No further decon needed there. For cutaneous exposure, skin contact with salts or liquids. Carefully remove all clothing, brush off any dry powder first, then flush the skin thoroughly with water, paying special attention to open wounds. For ingestion, activated charcoal might be considered if the patient is awake and can protect their airway, though its effectiveness for cyanide is debated. Gastric lavage, stomach pumping is generally not recommended anymore. And a critical safety point for anyone nearby. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is strongly discouraged due to the risk of HCN gas being regurgitated from the victim's stomach.
Okay, makes sense. Now for the game changers, the antidotes. You mentioned there are a couple of main strategies used, at least here in the U.S. Let's start with the one that's generally preferred now.
Right. The generally preferred first-line antidote in the U.S. is hydroxycobalamin. You might know it as vitamin B12A.
Vitamin B12, how does that work against cyanide?
It's actually quite elegant. Hydroxycobalamin has a cobalt ion in its structure that binds very strongly, very avidly to cyanide. It essentially plucks the cyanide molecule right out of circulation and off the cytochrome oxidase, forming cyanocobalamin, which is just standard vitamin B12. This cyanocobalamin is non-toxic and gets safely excreted in the urine. Think of it as a direct chelator, a chemical sponge.
And what's the big advantage of using this one?
The key advantage, and it's a huge one, is that it does not induce methemoglobinemia. This is incredibly important, especially in smoke inhalation victims. Why? Because they might also have carbon monoxide poisoning, which already impairs oxygen delivery by forming carboxyhemoglobin, or the patient might be severely anemic. You absolutely don't want to induce methemoglobinemia in those situations, as it would further reduce the blood's oxygen carrying capacity. Hydroxycobalamin avoids that problem entirely.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. What about the dosing? And are there any significant side effects clinicians need to watch for?
Dosing for adults is typically 5 grams given intravenously over about 15 minutes. If the patient doesn't respond adequately, a second 5-gram dose can be given for a total of 10 grams. For kids, it's weight-based. 70 milligrams per kilogram up to that 5-gram initial dose. Side effects are generally minimal, which is another big plus. It can cause a mild temporary rise in blood pressure, but honestly, that's often welcome in these hypotensive patients. The most noticeable side effect, though harmless, is that it turns the patient's skin, mucous membranes, and urine a reddish color for a day or two. This can interfere with some colorimetric lab tests, so the lab needs to be aware. The evidence supporting it is mainly strong case series showing clear benefit, especially in fire victims.
So hydroxycobalamin is the preferred option, especially if CO poisoning is suspected. What's the other main strategy? The older combination therapy.
Right. The other primary strategy involves 2 drugs given sequentially. Sodium nitrite followed by sodium thiosulfate. This used to be the standard cyanide antidote kit. Let's break it down. First, sodium nitrite. This drug intentionally induces methemoglobinemia.
Wait, you just said inducing methemoglobinemia can be bad. Why do it here?
Good question. It sounds counterintuitive, right? But here's the rationale. Sodium nitrite works by oxidizing the iron in hemoglobin from the ferrous Fe2+ state to the ferric Fe3+ state. This form is methemoglobin. Cyanide actually has a higher affinity for the iron in methemoglobin than it does for the iron in cytochrome oxidase. So by creating a controlled amount of methemoglobin in the blood, usually aiming for 10–20%, you create a circulating sink that pulls cyanide off the critical cytochrome oxidase enzyme in the mitochondria, effectively reversing the cellular poisoning.
Ah, I see. It acts like a decoy, sacrificing some oxygen carrying capacity to free up the cell's energy production.
Exactly. It's a clever biochemical trick. The adult dose is 300 milligrams, that's 10 milliliter of a 3% solution, given IV over 2 to 4 minutes. Pediatric doses are adjusted based on hemoglobin levels, but as we discussed, the big considerations are the potential for excessive methemoglobin formation if dosed incorrectly, and it can cause significant hypotension due to vasodilation. And again, it's generally withheld if significant carbon monoxide poisoning or severe anemia is suspected, because you'd be worsening an already bad oxygen delivery situation.
Okay, so that's the nitrite part. What about the second drug in that combo, sodium thiosulfate? You mentioned that earlier with detoxification.
Right. Sodium thiosulfate comes next. This is a sulfur donor we talked about. Its job is purely to enhance the body's natural detoxification pathway via the rhodinase enzyme. It provides the sulfur substrate that rhodinase needs to convert cyanide into the much less toxic thiocyanate for excretion. The adult dose is 12.5 grams, that's 50 milliliters of a 25% solution given IV, usually right after the nitrite. Pediatric dose is 1.65 milliliters of the 25% solution. Its main advantage is enhancing that final elimination of cyanide. It generally has few side effects on its own, though the thiocyanate produced can become toxic if it builds up, particularly in patients with kidney failure. The evidence shows both agents work individually, but they have a much greater synergistic benefit when used together.
So doctors have these 2 main toolkits, hydroxycobalamin or the nitrate thiosulfate combo. How do they choose which one to use in a real fast-moving emergency?
In practice today, hydroxycobalamin is generally the preferred first-line agent, largely because of its better safety profile, especially the lack of methemoglobin induction. This makes it the clear choice for undifferentiated shock, smoke inhalation victims, or patients with known anemia. It's just safer when you don't have all the information. However, the nitrate thiosulfate combination is still a vital tool. If hydroxycobalamin isn't available, or if a patient remains critically ill with severe acidosis despite a maximal dose of hydroxycobalamin. It's absolutely reasonable to administer the alternative strategy, the nitrite and thiosulfate. Sometimes you need both mechanisms. It's about having options and escalating care when needed.
That makes sense. Flexibility is key. What about those tricky nitrile exposures again, the ones with the delayed and prolonged effects? Does that require a different approach to antidote therapy?
Yes, that's a crucial special consideration we need to highlight. Because those nitriles are metabolized slowly, continuously releasing cyanide over time, the toxicity can be delayed and prolonged. So first, patients exposed to potentially toxic amounts need close observation for at least 24 hours in a monitored setting, like an ICU, even if they seem fine initially. Symptoms can pop up much later. Second, because the cyanide release continues, they often require prolonged or repeated antidotal therapy. This might involve a continuous IV infusion of sodium thiosulfate, say, for 24 hours to constantly fuel that rhodinase enzyme. Or it might require repeated doses of hydroxycobalamin or even the nitrites, depending on the clinical picture, lactate levels, and acidosis. It's a marathon, not a sprint, with nitrile poisoning.
So those are the mainstays, hydroxycobalamin and nitrite thiosulfate. But I'm guessing science hasn't stopped there. Are there other treatments that have been tried or maybe still being researched, even if they aren't frontline options right now?
Absolutely. Science is always looking for better options. Historically, amyl nitrite inhalants were part of the old kits, but they're largely abandoned now, not very effective, hard to dose. There are other methemoglobin inducers used in some countries, like 4-DMAP, but they have similar issues to sodium nitrite, sometimes more severe side effects. Cobalt-based chelators like cobalt EDPA are used in Europe but can have significant toxicity themselves. There's exciting research into cobinamide, which is like a super potent version of hydroxycobalamin, binds cyanide even more tightly. Still investigational, but promising. Other approaches being explored include different sulfur donors, like dimethyl trisulfide, or things that boost the rhodinase pathway, but things like disulfiram or N-acetylcysteine for acrylonitrile. The data just isn't strong enough yet for routine use. And importantly, one thing that doesn't work, despite seeming logical, is hyperbaric oxygen, HBO. Studies have shown no benefit for cyanide poisoning itself. Standard high-flow oxygen and antidotes are the way to go.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what have we really learned from this deep dive into the hidden, dangerous world of cyanide? This has been incredibly eye-opening.
I think the key takeaways are that cyanide poisoning, while maybe perceived as rare, is a critical, rapidly progressing toxicological emergency. Its diverse sources, industrial, fires, nature, iatrogenic, intentional mean is probably more common than often realized, which contributes to under-recognition and misdiagnosis. Its core toxicity comes from shutting down cellular oxygen utilization by inhibiting cytochrome oxidase. This leads to that characteristic picture of cellular hypoxia despite adequate oxygen delivery, severe metabolic acidosis, and often elevated venous oxygen saturation.
Yeah, and the most important action in a suspected case, given the diagnostic challenges.
Diagnosis relies heavily on context, clinical suspicion, and recognizing suggestive patterns, because individual symptoms are nonspecific, and classic clues like the bitter almond odor are unreliable myths. Therefore, the absolute paramount action is immediate, empirical antidotal therapy coupled with aggressive supportive care. Don't wait for confirmation. Hydroxycobalamin is generally preferred, especially in smoke inhalation or anemia, due to its safety profile. But the nitrite-thiosulfate combination remains a vital backup and alternative. And remember, for nitriles, prolonged observation and potentially prolonged therapy are absolutely crucial due to that delayed and extended toxicity.
This deep dive really hammers home how crucial rapid assessment, quick thinking, and accurate, up-to-date knowledge are, especially in these high-stakes situations where every single second counts. And for you, our curious listener, here's maybe a final thought to mull over. Given this widespread, often invisible presence of cyanide in industry, common fires, even certain foods we discussed, what surprising, maybe overlooked impacts might this silent, potent chemical have on aspects of public health and safety beyond just these acute, life-threatening poisoning events we focused on today? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have. and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.